All righty, welcome everybody to our January work session. I'm glad to see the full room. It's hard to believe we're already at the end of the first month of this new year. I feel like it just started. But we're going to go ahead and review our agenda for next week's board meeting. Miss Kelly, you'll have the invocation and pledge. We'll have our presentation of colors by the Wyneborough High School JROTC. We'll approve the minutes from our last three meetings. Approve our current agenda. Ms. Stevens and myself went out on a clean school visit, so we'll have that report out for us. We'll have some recognitions from Dr. McMichael. Looks like quite a few there. We do. So we'll head into our department reports. Dr. Green.
Yes, you have the communications report and the 100th day of school student enrollment reports are there for your review. Unless you have questions, I'll just let those stand as presented.
Still climbing. We're almost at 15,000. All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Miss Houston.
Good evening. We'll start out with our invoices paid between $10,000 and $24,999 for the month of January. The first one is Tech Optics, paid out of capital projects for $12,003.36 for the phone systems for the new elementary school. The second one is for Tech Optics, paid out of capital projects, $18,152.62. And this is for Auburn Elementary School's camera expansion. So 32 cameras over there at Auburn Elementary School. The last one is to Bulldog Kia. It's paid out of the general fund for $22,499. And this is for a 2021 Kia Seltos. And that's a maintenance vehicle. So that, of course, will help out our district-wide at the maintenance department. Any questions? All right, so tonight we have Carl Vinson Institute here to present to us the report on an additional age-based tax exemption for property taxes. We currently have exemptions available to our over 62 and over citizens. That is based on income and covers up to a $200,000 valued home. So before we could make any decisions on if we can change that number, we needed to find out how much this could cost the district. So we got Carl Vinson Institute involved, and they did a whole study for us. And so they're going to come up and present to us the report. Just remember that this report is for our board, and so questions and comments should really just be the board asking questions and stuff. Y'all just take all this information in, and then at a later date, come back if you want to speak to the board. But for tonight, this is just basically for the board. All right. So without further ado, okay, come on up.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alexandra Hill, and I am a fiscal and economic analyst at Carl Vinson Institute of Government. And again, we did a study on the Barrow County school tax, and I'm just going to jump right into it. So the three study scenarios that we evaluated were scenario one, which would remove the income cap off of qualifying senior households. So all individuals age 62 or older would be eligible for the property tax exemption. Scenario two would increase the income cap for qualifying senior households. So that income cap would be raised to $50,000 for taxable income and $100,000 for non-taxable income. And then scenario three, which we evaluated, was a full school tax exemption at age 70. So all individuals in the county would be eligible to be exempted from school tax once they turn 70 years old. And we wanted to do a little bit of background research on kind of how many people in Georgia are currently covered by age-based property tax exemptions. So these were actually really rare in about 1970, and then they became a lot more common and rose to about 85% of Georgians being covered by living in a district where there is some sort of age-based property tax exemption. And 45% of those actually have no income cap on that property tax exemption. So you can see that that kind of leveled off in the early 2000s. So that gives us a little bit of historical context on the issue. Just a few demographic points about Barrow County that we found and kind of informed our analysis. So 78% of units, single family units in Barrow County are owner occupied. And that's a good bit higher than Georgia's percentage, which is 66%. The income of homeowners in Barrow County is actually about 9.2% higher than the state as well. And owner occupied homes were valued about 5.8% higher in Barrow than Georgia, according to the last census. So homeowners in Barrow, we've also found skew a little bit older, and we have some population projections which show that trend intensifying over the next 10 years. And we have a pretty good proportion of residents already age 65 or older, which is 14% as of this year. And then we project that going up to just under 1 in 5 residents being 65 or older as of 2031. So this is a little graph that just shows the comparison of, it's kind of divided into, other than the under 35s, 10-year age classes of the population of homeowners in Barrow County versus homeowners in Georgia. So Barrow County homeowners have a little bit higher mean at 51.5 years. And when we're thinking 10 years into the future, what a policy change might do to the budget, think about those bars that are really primarily that 55 to 64 age group, shift that over one age class. And so you can see what that might do to, the property tax base when that comes to pass. So these are the This is the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget 2021 series interim long-term population projections. Try saying that 5 times fast. And this is the comparison of the proportion of Barrow residents in these different age classes. And the left side is the darker blue line, and that's 2022. And then comparing that to how it's going to look in 2031. So we're going to see a lot less children in Barrow County. It'll go down from about 21% to about 17% of the population. We're going to see less prime working age groups between 25 and 44. And we're seeing the population shift into the older age groups. So you can see that the 65 to 74 and then the 75 or older age groups are increasing a good bit. And then we just wanted to kind of give a little bit of background on specifically the parcel values in Barrow County. So the average parcel values range a little bit in terms of ages, but the highest average parcel value is about 250,000. And that is for residents aged 45 to 54. But if you can imagine, again, 10 years in the future, if those people decided to keep their homes that entire 10 years, again, you'd shift that bar over. So possibly some of the most valuable homes would be owned by people 65 or older. And again, just to remind you all of the methods, and these are the different scenarios. So we kind of use this as a bookmark between our different sections of this presentation, just to remind you. So again, scenario 1 is removing that income cap. Everyone 62 or older would qualify for the property tax exemption. Scenario 2 would be increasing the income cap to 50K for taxable and 100K for non-taxable. And then finally, that scenario 3 is making everyone available to take the exemption at age 70. So this is, not many of us think about this math more than once a year, but this is how a normal home is valued and then taxed. You take the home value, you multiply it by 0.4 or 40%, which gives you, for a $300,000 home, that would give you a value of $120,000. You would subtract the school tax exemption from that, and the current level for the exemptions of concern is at $80,000. So then your taxed amount on your house would only be $40,000. at a mill rate of 0.07881. So you would get a school tax of $715 annually. And then this is just kind of showing what part of this formula we were focusing on the most, which is a sensitivity analysis of moving that $80,000 reduction in the home value up or down, mostly up, either to 100,000, 150,000, or a full home value exemption. So a little bit of the methods, although, you know, even as a researcher, this project was a little challenging. But I will say that, you know, the methodology was interesting for me in terms of projecting data. So we modeled the number of parcels that would be added in Barrow County each year based on the historical rate of growth from 2010 to 2020. And I will show you a graph of what that looks like. So the Great Recession, which began in the early 2000s and was a primarily housing-based recession, we wanted to eliminate that portion of the parcel growth data from our analysis. We also eliminated that COVID dip, that little kind of downward trend we had in home building between 2020 and 2022. And so as you can see, we are trying to mirror our projected recovery in home starts to what was happening from 2010 to 2020. And then once we had modeled how many parcels would be added each year, we also needed to model how much parcel values would increase on a year-to-year basis. So we averaged the rate of growth and valuation since 2005 all the way up to 2022, and we got 5.6%. So in our model, we had each home increasing in value 5.6% each year. And we modeled the ages that we didn't have. We did have a selection of the tax assessor's data, about just under 7,000 parcels that did have age data. For the rest of those parcels, we modeled that using 2021 census data and those OPB population projections that we looked at before. And then we finally modeled incomes using 2021 census data as well. So this is what our projection of the age trends in Barrow came out to be. We expect that the mean age of a homeowner in Barrow will go up from about 51.6 in 2024 to 58.4 in 2031. So you have that overall population trend of more older people either migrating into this area or aging in this area. And then you also have the trend of a little bit higher mean age in homeowners. So I'm going to pass it over now to my coworker, Tommy Shepard, to give y'all a little bit of the results. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Good evening, everybody. How are you? Can you hear me okay? I'm usually way louder than I really need to be. And tonight I'm kind of fighting with my voice just a little bit. So if you can't, let me know. I'll try to get a little closer or adjust something. Alex, thank you for doing all the hard work on that and making my job easy. And while I'm pointing people out, the fellow next to Alex is our demographer, Taylor Halfley at the Institute. So as Alex said, Jennifer came to us, asked us to think about doing a simulation of how some of these hypothetical scenarios might play out in terms of tax revenues. And we kind of look at this situation where we have a county where people are rapidly aging, kind of like me. Okay. And we see a lot of home construction. We see high home values. We met with Guy Rogers, the tax assessor for tax data. They were very kind in sharing that with us. So what we essentially got from them was basically a spreadsheet of every property, every residential property in the county that could potentially qualify for the tax credit. Okay, within that were people who already get the credit and younger people that might age into that at some point in time. Excluded from that were properties that would never qualify for the credit. So I assume in there duplexes, condominiums, apartment buildings, things like that. So if you look at some of those numbers in the study when you have a copy and it doesn't exactly sync up with other numbers that are out there, that's what's going on behind the scenes. So we started with this base of property values going back to 2005. For some of those, as Alex told us, we had the age of the property owner, but you can imagine that that's the property owners that have gone down and registered for the exemption. So they tended to be a subsection that was a bit older than the population in general. For some of those, we only knew that there was an exemption, but no age. So we were able to look at a minimum age for that exemption, and we assigned those. I got that right. Okay. And for everyone else, we simply did, in economics, we call it a simulation. Basically, we drew ages from a population pool that was simulated that would be the age for Barrow County residents. So we used their mean and standard deviation. All right. An economist can't get through a talk without a little bit on statistics. So I'm sure y'all finally remember that from your college statistics class somewhere. All right. And we're looking at those three scenarios. So we remove the income restriction and allow everybody over 62 to qualify. The second one, we looked at adjusting the levels of income that allow you to qualify between taxable and non-taxable. And then finally, we let everyone in our simulation who was over 70 qualify for the exemption. So you can kind of imagine this big picture where you've got a population that's moving forward. They're aging by 1 year every year. So some people are aging into this over time. And if we start, and you're seeing a little bit when you look at that of the next slide. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but kind of just disregard that bottom row. All right, so if we start to look at that and think about what that looks like for, say, the typical homeowner, just to give you something you can sort of wrap your head around. And yeah, now I wish I'd worn my glasses, but we'll muddle through there. Okay, so what we're looking at there under this kind of scenario one, across the top of the chart, you see just some selected assessed home values. Okay, so if you've got a screen in front of your face, does that look? You're following me there. Okay. So we've got, oh, Alex is going to save the day here. Yeah. My wife tells me to wear my glasses and I just tell her the world looks better when I don't see it so clearly sometimes, you know. All right. So we're looking at assessed home values across the top, and we're looking at these various levels of exemption down the left-hand column. So essentially the takeaway on that is if your home is assessed at a fair market value of $200,000, you're paying zero tax now. And if your home is $218,510, okay, wow, where'd that number come from? We calculated that as the average home value of all the homes that were in our data set. So if you were at that average home value, then you would currently be paying $132 a year in school taxes. Okay, we bumped that up to $375,000, and you will see that with the $80,000 exemption, that homeowner would currently be paying $1,320 a year. And if you bumped that up, if you bump the exemption amount up to $100,000, they would be paying $894. And once you go to 150 or unlimited, that home also would pay no tax, assuming they qualify on the other parts like the age and the income. And then finally, we picked a home that was valued at $500,000. And you see that they really can't escape that school tax until you get to an unlimited deduction there. So kind of bear in mind, I know there are a lot of moving parts to this. Okay, everybody nod yes if you're on board with that. Okay, but for those first two scenarios, and actually remember that scenario two is kind of 2A and 2B because we're looking at taxable income and not taxable income. Within each of those, we're also doing some sensitivity analysis on this kind of what would happen if you changed the income amount. Okay, is that like as clear as mud for you guys? All right, I think it'll get better. All right. So that's just to kind of give you an idea of what tax would look like now. So we ran this through our model that we put together, and the slide that you're looking at basically calculates the total amount of school tax that would be paid on those properties that could potentially qualify or currently qualify. So within that universe of residences that could potentially qualify for the exemption. Now, I want to kind of caution you as you look at that. in later slides, we have kind of referred to the reduction in income under those scenarios as a loss, because it's about the best way we've got to characterize that. But I want you to really stop and think for a minute. It's not so much a loss like we would show in an accounting sense. Think of it as money left on the table if you change to one of these hypothetical what if scenarios versus what you're doing now. Okay, does that work for everybody? So what you're seeing here is an amount of tax collected, and you'll notice that it's going up all across the board, right? Because homes are being built, property values are going up. So you see increasing school tax collections. But if you look at these scenarios across the top, across the bottom where we're doing this kind of sensitivity with the 80, 100, 150 full exemption, you're collecting a little less tax in those cases. So the baseline is sort of that first in every year block. That baseline is kind of the total amount of tax collected now, the way you're doing things. And as you make that exemption more generous, then you're collecting a little less. So I want you to think of that more in terms of money you're leaving on the table and not like an accounting loss. Okay. So far, so good. Yeah. A little nod lets me know I'm on track. All right. Oh, gosh, you're right. You're closer than I am.
So far left, black, and that's the baseline with the 80K exemption. The second from the left is like a navy, and that's the, if you kind of put it in place the million income limit, one, like that's the $80,000 deduction. Then that middle blue line is if you took away the income limit and had a $150,000 deduction of the value, then
Light blue.
yes, and then the red is the full deduction. So basically, you don't have any residual value of your house being taxed.
I apologize. I realize that's a little bit of an eye chart and there's a lot going on. But essentially with the first line for each of those years, we're forecasting school tax collections. And every time within that year that you step down to a little bit lighter color and then to a red, we thought those would show up better than other options that we had. That is collecting a little less income as you make that deduction a little more generous. So the more you deduct from the 40% of that fair market value, the less you're taxing and the less you're bringing in tax dollars. Does that work for you guys? Is that good? Okay. So if this is the actual dollars collected, then if we look at the flip side of that, here is kind of the money that we're leaving on the table versus a baseline. So this is telling us that in the early years, let me flip my own eye chart here. So in the early years, you're looking at like $2 or $3 million for each of these successive changes, this kind of sensitivity in the deduction amount. And as you get on out into 2031 at the end of our projection period, as people age and you have more homes and you have higher home values, you're giving up more like $22, $23 million. So as the population ages, you kind of see that snowball down the road. So these are both looking at scenario one. The first chart is, and I've got a reverse here, right? All right, so the first chart is dollars collected, and we see how those dollars collected go down as we're more generous with this exemption. Okay, I see a couple of puzzle looks there. All right, and as we look at the flip side of that, and we see how much money we're leaving on the table relative to what we're doing now. Okay, now if we
We're switching it.
Okay.
And this report is online, so y'all can dig into it and get home and pull it down. It's going to be under
And also, while I'm thinking about it, board members, we're presenting this as a draft to you guys, so we're perfectly good with incorporating your comments into it, or if there's maybe another, what if this, what if that, is long, I think as long as it doesn't get too far out of hand, okay? I think we're willing to go back and fiddle with some more scenarios. So bear that in mind as we kind of go through this. I may run afoul of my director for putting that out there, but I think we're probably happy to do that. Okay, so we've exhausted scenario one. Does anybody want to ask questions on it before we look at two? Okay, and so in scenario two, we are looking at raising the limit on both, or separately rather, taxable and retirement or non-taxable income. Now, since I don't have any data on tax returns, okay, so I don't have that to go from. The next thing, or the only thing we've got to go look at, is really census data. And we were able to look at census data down to the Barrow County level and look at average incomes for retirement and for non-retirement. A couple of things to bear in mind, and I think you'll see that when you see the results, is if I look at the average retirement income, so pensions and Social Security for Barrow County, for the sample that the census puts out, it's about $39,900 a year. If I look at taxable income, earned income, it's about 41. So there's not a lot of difference in those. All right. And remember, I brought up means and standard deviations, right? And everybody kind of cringed a little bit. So the spread on those distributions, y'all are going to go tell my boss I went down this road anyway, right? The spread on those distributions is not really narrow. So that means that we don't expect to see big differences in tweaking those two levels. And whoops, indeed we don't. All right, I talked about scenario two. So we're raising the cap to 50 for taxable and 100 for non-taxable. And I'm not going to show you all the estimated collections because you've seen that busy graph once. So I'm just going to go directly to sort of what we're calling the money left on the table. All right. And indeed, we do not see a big difference between those two scenarios with that. Okay. They look very, very similar. So in the early years, that's running, given these various scenarios, you're leaving between $500,000 and $2 million on the table for, say, 2022. And if you were to put that in place and look out towards 2031, it would be more like somewhere between 12 and $18 million. Okay, and I probably should have mentioned it, but you figure out that 2A is on the left and 2B is on the right. So we don't see quite as severe of a change as we did in the first scenario that we looked at. And we don't see a very big difference in which of those two income caps we decide to tinker with. Okay, questions on that one before we kind of look at scenario three? Okay, so in scenario three, our charge there was to think about what it would look like if everyone 70 and over was just fully exempted from paying school tax. So you hit 70, that's zero. But for everyone else, the current scheme, the current structure with 62 and the 80,000 exemption is still in place. So the results there are, hey, that one's a little easier to read than the others. So under the current scenario, if that stayed in place, you're looking at the black line on the left. And if you look at exempting the more mature taxpayers in the county, okay, you're looking at a reduction, and we were able to squeeze this all into one graph. So you're basically leaving on the table or realizing a loss that looks like the red line there. So somewhere around a 10 million mark. All right. Now, my colleagues warned me not to go down the road of this last slide. And I'm kind of stubborn and I don't listen as well as I should sometimes. I wanted some way to encapsulate all of these three scenarios into one graph so that you could compare and look at that. And this is going to be, well, it's a little messy, but I think if you stare at it and if you've got a screen in front of you, it's going to be a little clearer. I apologize to you guys over here trying to look up at the big one. All right, but here it is, okay, in all its glory. All right, bear with me, and I'm going to talk through this, and then you can think about it for a while. The blue block is scenario one, okay? Remove the income cap and fiddle around with the amount of the exemption, 80, 100, 150, and fully exempt whatever the value of your home is. So that's the blue box. The red and the black are scenario two, A and B, taxable income, non-taxable income, raising the cap. Remember, we said we didn't expect those to be very different, and they're not. And then the kind of obnoxious yellow at the bottom is exempting the more mature taxpayers that are 70 and over. All right. Now, if I had a laser pointer, this might be a little less painful. But if you take a look, I think I can, there we go. All right. So if you kind of zero in there, okay, the blue line is scenario one with full exemption. It is the one that leaves the most money on the table or represents the biggest difference between the baseline and what's going on now. If you step that blue line up to here, and to here, if you can pick out those colors, that gives you an idea of how much you're giving up with each successive change of that exemption amount. Okay, we good with that? Okay. If we look at the red and the blue, we also, and then they're pretty closely intertwined. I didn't pick red and black because they're Georgia colors. I picked them because you can kind of visually distinguish a little bit. All right. Yep, here we go. So if you look at those, this also steps us through each of those successive exemption amounts. And I guess I'm going to call this one a worst. I don't know if I want to call it a worst case scenario, which you're leaving the most money on the table. I don't know what's worse because I don't know what the board's objectives are. Okay. And then if you look at the 70 and over exemption, it is the yellow line that sort of falls right in the middle. So what I would encourage you to do is to think about the fact that there are going to be numerous options within this kind of smorgasbord of possibilities here that money-wise, you would be very indifferent to. Policy-wise, that's not our call to make. We're kind of running the numbers there. Okay, but just to realize, just to kind of encapsulate all of those confusing little scenarios into one slide that if you stare at for 3 or 4 hours, you've probably got a pretty good picture. Okay. So if we were to kind of summarize that just a little bit across all those scenarios, foregone revenue is increasing as population ages. Okay, as that population gets older, you're giving up more revenue going forward as you have more older people. As the home value deduction is increased, you're also stepping down and giving up more income. All right. Scenario one ranges from a low in 2022 of about $2 to $5 million up to around 6 to as much as 23 with that full exemption and out in 2031. All right. Scenario two, taxable, non-taxable. Those are pretty close based on that census data and range from about 1 to 4 million currently out to somewhere between about 4 and 18 out into the future in 2031. And then scenario three, exempting the 70 and over, ranges from, a low of about 2 million now to around 11 out in the future. Okay.
Question. Can we go back to scenario two?
We can. How about so I'm pretty much done here. Let me, before I open it up for questions, I want to thank Jennifer and the board, all of y'all so much for allowing us to work on this and work with you on it and be a part of it. And I would probably be in big trouble if I didn't do a little shameless advertising and put our website and that sort of thing up there. Okay, so I will open it up for questions, and you'd like to go back and stare at scenario 2.
Yeah, the 2 slides back from where you are right now.
Okay, 1, 2, one more.
Right there.
That one, okay.
Scenario 2.
Mhm.
Seems to me that there is a huge range between 4 million and 18 million in fiscal year 2031, depending on the home value deduction.
That is,
Can you explain that a little bit to me?
I can. Let me get back to a chart that I can look at, and I will chase that down for you.
That just seems like a.
Okay, so in scenario 2, actually, let me go back to my real eye chart here. All right, and in scenario 2, we're seeing out here, when we get way out into the future, we're seeing these are fairly tight, but we're seeing as you step that income cap up or down, you're seeing a really big difference from not a big change here to really large there.
Yeah, I think that that highest value is when you do an unlimited home value deduction. So for all of the scenarios, that value is gonna be a lot higher than any of the other ones where you leave it at either 80K, 100K, or 150K. If you're getting, homes that might cost $2 million or $5 million, not paying any.
They're fully exempt, but when you get down to the.
Yeah, I get that part. Here's where my brain is, okay? It has just come to our attention that we have a lot of folks in Barrow County who have been exempt because of their incomes, okay? And because of the value of their property. All of a sudden, the starter home has gone from 1986 and $65,000 to 2022 and $350,000. Okay. What I'm most concerned about is getting those folks who have lived in their homes a long time and paid taxes and done everything they need to do, but their income is not increasing because they're retired. And yet we're hitting them with school taxes now because the tax assessor says that they could sell their home for a lot more money. Okay, that doesn't seem fair, right, or reasonable to me. So what I'm concerned about, I'm not too concerned about people who live in, I'm gonna make some people in the room mad and just go ahead and say that and do it. I'm not real concerned about people paying some school taxes who live in multi-million-dollar homes and have a lot of income, because they can afford it. And the argument can be made that they work hard to earn that money and they shouldn't have to pay school taxes, and I get that. But on the other hand, I have to be concerned about the children we are going to educate and how we're going to pay for that. And as long as Barrow County doesn't have the industrial and commercial base that it needs, and it's pretty much a bedroom community for starter homes, then it's going to be for us to have the money we need to operate the school system. If we go all out here and just say everybody is exempt. So have we actually asked, we probably haven't, or you would have brought it to us. So I'm going to throw this out there. Have we actually done a study to see how much revenue we would anticipate increasing by having senior communities here and having more seniors move here because of the fact that we don't have school taxes?
So you're asking about some kind of a situation that would attract more seniors to the area, and then what would be the economic impact of them spending money in the community and that sort of thing? So no, ma'am, that was not a part of what we were asked to do here.
Could you do it?
We do economic impact studies all the time. Absolutely.
I'm just saying, in order for us to make a reasonable, informed decision about this, we need to be able to look at all sides of this. And if we could see how there is, evidence to support the fact that school revenues would stay the same or not decrease as much if we did the total exemption. Then I think that would be a good thing for us to know before we try to make a decision on what we want to do here.
Okay, so that is an entirely separate study that you're asking about.
Different.
It is something that's in our wheelhouse. Yes, and that's, I'm sure we would be happy to be open to that discussion.
Well, I feel like right now we've got half of the equation. We've got the information that we need about what decreasing responsibilities for taxes would do at various levels. But I need to know what the offsetting process for that would be too.
Okay, I can see that being a valid question.
I don't know how the rest of the board feels about it, but I don't think we can just look at this and say, well, let's just take the middle or, or anything, or we can just do everything or whatever without having the answers to all the questions. And a valid question is how much of our loss would be offset by income from seniors?
Sure, and we're not trying to offer up what is the best way to structure
I know.
anything. We're just looking at these kind of well-defined scenarios and estimating what would happen under each of those.
Yeah, and also to clarify a little bit, this is just one piece of the puzzle, as you're saying that, but this is going into a study that, this isn't something even if we wanted to change it next week, we can't. There's a process, go through the legislature and a vote and, a popular vote and everything else too. But so there definitely more things I agree we need to look at. I do have one quick question. I think it's hopefully a quick question. Back when you started, you mentioned the number of children. Was that number of children is in total or per capita?
Was a percentage of the
So,
population.
okay, right.
So if you want to flip that.
About the third slide.
Stop
somewhere
when I
in
get
there.
close.
uh,
Go forward one. Yeah. No, it was,
Sorry.
I think I know the slide you're talking about.
Yes.
Yes, right there.
So, you forecast that the proportion of the population that is under 15 years old is going to go down from about 21% in 2021 to about 17% in 2031.
But a lot more children, just a smaller percentage.
Right.
So I think the total population grows with the slices of the pie.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to kind of clarify.
Yeah, thanks. I was hoping you would.
I didn't want people to think, hey, they're gonna have less kids, so they need,
The number of children under the age of 15 in this scenario is increasing, but because the population is not growing as
it's a
fast.
percentage of the population, right?
So for example, in Barrow County in the past 10 years, population grew by about 14,000 people. 4,500 of that population was of the 65 and older population, and only 1,400 of that growth was the under 18 population.
Yeah, and
So
that,
the older age group is growing faster than the rest of the county. And that's not unique to Barrow, that's statewide.
right, yeah. And I just wanted to clarify. I didn't want people thinking that because our numbers are definitely going up and
Right.
the total numbers. I'll just clarify that.
Something real quick, just before we move on. So, I think this has been really helpful, so thank you. Also, I think that if anybody had asked us a few years ago, if we would ever believe that Barrow County was going to grow at the rate that it has been growing, we all probably would have laughed because nobody foresaw the rate of growth that was going to happen. So, and I don't believe that I don't believe that we even foresee what's going to come because it's growing faster than I believe we can imagine now. I think it's going to keep on growing. But to Lynn's comment, I feel like I need to speak to that in terms of, not caring about people who live in big houses or small houses, because, as an at-large representative of the board, I feel like I should speak to that because, I do represent the entire county. So I represent everybody from Auburn Trailer Park to the Georgia Club. And so as a representative for the entire county, I feel like I should speak to that. I'll use my mother for an example. My dad died when he was 49 years old. And my mom paid her house off, and my mom does live in a nice house, right? But when my mom retired and she paid her house off, she had a set amount of money, right? And she has to live on that amount of money for the rest of her life. And so even though people may look at her and they may say, well, she lives in a nice house, and maybe she has money and she's retired, and they may look at her and think that she's doing very well. And granted, she is, but she's a young widow and she has to live on the amount of money that she has for the rest of her life. So just because somebody may live in a nice home or may have a good situation or look a certain way, doesn't necessarily mean that they're not living on a fixed amount of money or a fixed income. And they have to take the amount of money that they have and make it last for a long time. And maybe if they're living in that house, they have more bills to pay. So I think we have to have compassion for everyone in our community and just try to remember that, you know, that is our job on the board, is to represent all people, not just people who, you know, look a certain way and I just think that's important for us to remember, because, you know, not everybody's situation is as it appears, you know.
Do I
So-
need to clarify what I said for you?
No, you don't. I've heard it loud and clear, but I
But
just
what I'm
wanted to.
saying is, I would be delighted, because I fall into that group, of eliminating school taxes entirely, no matter where you live or what your income is, okay? From a selfish standpoint, but from looking at what we are required to do in order to give our children the best education we possibly can, given the resources that we have, we're looking at diminishing a resource to a great degree. And we need to be able to make that up somehow. So that's where I'm headed here.
Sure,
I
absolutely.
just want to make sure everybody understands that.
Well, I just want to make sure everybody knows that we are concerned.
Well, I think that's one reason a lot of it's tied to income, and, you know, I think that's probably why the board way back when tied it to income instead of just property tax, really on both sides. Yeah.
That's correct.
Absolutely.
Yeah, my concern by looking at all this is just worrying that we're not getting young people moving to Bear County. I mean.
Yeah.
That's a little scary, you know, and what can we do about that? Like, maybe we need to look at it from a different angle instead of worrying about 2020, 31, and now everyone's older and we're not taxing them. You know, what can we do to attract people that are going to be taxpayers and making good money and income like that? So that should be part of it. And also, you know, home values have gone up, but kind of unfairly. Like, I don't know, you know, all of a sudden you're in a house that's worth 200,000 the last 2 or 3 years. Suddenly, for no reason, your house is worth 400. And there needs to be a little bit of an adjustment anyway, I think. And I think that might be coming. But, you know, I see the starter homes near me, and they don't look like they're worth $350,000. And I don't know how these young families are starting out like that. That's rough. So I wish we could figure out a way to attract young families to Barrows so that the seniors can be exempt completely, and the young families who have children in the community, you know, are you know, contributing. And how much of sales tax is going into, I mean, I'm new at this, but how much, I know sales tax is part of the equation. So it's property taxes and sales.
It is, it's not a number that I have got in
Okay.
front of me. So, yeah, we sort of did this. We were very pigeonholed in what we were working. with.
Yeah, just
And
to
as
kind of
far
briefly
as like-
clarify without going into too much detail, sales tax does, portion sales tax through SPOS does. And honestly, if it didn't, we wouldn't be able to run the system.
Mhm.
But there are only certain buckets that money can be spent in, and things like salaries and those type of things, we cannot use that money for. So it's, and as you'll find out going forward, it's, there's nothing quite like education when it comes to the budgeting process.
Yeah.
It's very scripted, not from our level, but from the state and federal level about what can be used on what. So it's, basically, we're talking pretty much about general funding, and it's not SPOS or federal or some of the other ones. There's multiple buckets that we have to balance and deal with. So it's, and it, yeah, that, and, you know, and I was kind of amazed. I was just looking at a forecast yesterday that, you know, where our average has gone way up, but still surrounding us, everyone else's has gone up, and we're still, even though we're a lot higher than I think personally we should be. Average home prices, everyone around us is still higher still.
Yeah.
And so that hasn't changed. That's always been Barrow County's kind of piece.
Well, having a
It's
affordable
closed the
housing.
gap a little bit. It has closed the gap some, but it's still there. So it's a lot of, so many variables. It's mind boggling sometimes.
One question I had, when I was down at the state for training, this issue got brought up in several other districts that are already doing. That have been for a long time, as long as I've known,
Oh,
like for Forsyth and Hall County, the tax exemption for seniors. But they said they're having to go back and look at actually pulling it or changing theirs. Have you done any kind of study with them? Have they come to you to?
We have not. This is so I've done tons of simulations of all kinds of things over the years. This is the first one that I have tackled specifically for school tax.
right. Yeah, I thought it was.
I just want to make sure.
We'll probably just open the door for you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure, like I've told the city, that I want to make sure whatever we do, we have our information, because the last thing we want to do is give our citizens a tax break and then have to come back and do
Take it back.
everything
Yeah,
and then
I
take it
agree.
back.
Once it's in place, it's
That's
probably going to be kind of hard to walk back. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
What was the median age that you shared with us?
51.9.
Is that-
That was a homeowner, it's not all people there.
That's homeowner.
That is of the homeowners, right?
Yeah, you have to remember, we're only dealing with percentage of the full population of the full 80.
Right, so remember, we were looking at what would happen if you changed school tax formulas. So we are only looking at homeowners. The population of the county in general would include children that are too young to own a home and possibly seniors that are in a nursing home, maybe something like
I
that.
guess what I was thinking was in response to the question about young families, we do have young families. The median age is 36 of Bear County
Okay,
residents. So we do have. young
They're just not
families.
able to, like you were saying, they're
Some of them
not
just renting.
able to afford homes yet.
but if it's for the whole county, were you thinking homeowners or just the county in general?
Just the county in general.
So, yeah, when you lump in people that we would look at that are 1 to 18 that do not own a home, that would pull that down quite a bit, right? Yes, good observation.
Just response to we do have young families.
Okay.
That's who is moving,
It just
I
was
think.
looking
Yeah.
from that graph, it looked
Yeah.
boring.
Well, we remember,
appreciate
we're
you
just
guys.
looking at that universe of properties that could potentially qualify. So there's all kinds of properties out there that are not going to get a school tax exemption. So we had no need to look at those. We simply looked at the group that we had to look at that would be affected by it. Okay. Other questions for our group? Yes, ma'am.
So what we're gonna do right now is we're gonna move on. There's a lot for us to digest. Since we're hearing it for the first time as well, so what we're gonna ask for you guys to do is think about those questions to help us as we're digesting this. And then shoot them to us via email to the board, or you can request to appear before the board for next week's meeting to bring these ideas before us. We appreciate you guys.
You're welcome. Thank
Like I
you
said,
for
a
having
ton
us.
to digest, but I appreciate how clear it is for us.
It's great data.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I realize there's a lot coming at you in that report. There's a lot of moving pieces. So, yeah, and we're bringing it to you as a draft. So if there are comments, if there is another scenario you'd like to look at, if there's some tweaks to it, we can work those hopefully into a final draft. So thank you for your time and attention. And if we can help you as you work through this process, please let us know.
Really
Okay, thank y'all
appreciate
so
it.
much.
Thank y'all so much.
I think for the one here, we still need to dig into.
Right, absolutely.
Start getting.
Right.
I mean, we could probably find this out there.
For sure.
Or two.
At least.
So, yes, sir. So to give you an idea of how this would move forward, we're gonna digest this, probably have multiple meetings as a board to discuss this with the superintendent and his staff. And then if we find a sustainable solution, we'll have the superintendent present it to us. We'll vote on it. If it passes our board, we'll send it to the county for approval, and then we'll send it out to the voters for a special election to vote on, and then it would take effect the next following calendar year. Okay? And then while I have everybody, don't forget to vote for the renewal of the eSPOS in March too, because that's going to help us by making this decision. If we can keep that, we've got to have that eSPOS. So if we can keep that going, that'll make this decision much easier. So was that it for you, Ms. Houston?
That's all. Thank you.
Nothing else?
She's like, "No."
All right, Mr. Perno.
Okay, good evening. Just to update on our projects. We got some photos there of our new elementary school. We're on time and within budget. Things are moving along well out there. We got finishes going on the inside of the building. And so we're pleased with the progress there. Okay, Bassett 2. We've got storm water materials showing up, which is good with all the rain that we've had. And so it's a little sluggish there in the dirt, but we'll keep forging ahead there. And then our lights, our athletic lights, we've got all the lights up and operational. We're having some issues with the lights at the Appalachia baseball field right now, but we're working through those things with Georgia Power. But lights have made a tremendous difference, and we've got these spring seasons about to get underway, so how things are moving along there. Any questions?
Looks good. Thank you. All right, thank you, sir. Dr. Moten.
Good evening. I am pleased to introduce three team members who are integral to the teaching and learning team. They are the Educational Technology Integration Specialist, also known as TIG, which is an acronym for Technology Integration Group. To my immediate left is Ms. Amy Waters, and the middle is Dr. Penny Christensen, and to the right of Dr. Christensen is Mrs. Caitlin Maynard. So they are here to tell us what they do, the progress that they've made, and their plans that they have for instructional technology with the district. Welcome to you.
Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Moten. Again, my name is Amy Waters. I'm a proud member of TIG, Technology Integration Group. One thing that we wanted to just kind of highlight is really who we are, what purpose we serve in Barrow County school system. And the quote that you see on this slide is taken from the plan for the teaching and learning department, of which we are part of, and definitely works in conjunction with the district strategic plan. And just to highlight a couple of parts of this, we do provide professional learning and support to aid teachers, which we know goes hand in hand with our students and the instruction, the incredible instruction that they've received. We do focus on innovative teaching and learning practices. We've got project-based learning, of course, in the Arts Institute. And one thing that TIG really focuses on is that 21st century learning and how we can integrate more technology well in our classrooms. One thing that was mentioned recently, and it really made me pause, is that we are 23% through the 21st century already. Okay, an intentional pause there because I certainly had a pause after hearing that. And so how can we best prepare our students for what's ahead of them, both professionally and academically? And so that's one thing that we are charged and super excited about being able to be a part of. So last year, there were 2 members of the TIG group. I am thankful that there are 3 members, me being the most recent one, to become part of this great group. And so last year, it was really broken up into the Appalachia High School,
area and then the Winder Barrow High School area. And so you could see just based on this visual, how we have it broken up amongst the three of us this year. And so all of us do represent and are able to meet with elementary, middle and high school teachers and be an integral part of their professional learning and technology integration. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Penny Christensen now.
Thank you, Amy. We have three main points. We tried to sum up all the variety of things that we do for schools and teachers in the district. And the first thing is we support educators. Teachers are our largest work group, and they are important, and we support them directly through in-person group trainings, one-on-one sessions, and we support them indirectly through the digital coaches that are in each of our schools. We work with digital coaches in the background, making sure that they're able on the ground, down the hall, in the building to help teachers if we aren't available at that moment for them. And we also lead with a vision. Our job allows us to look ahead a little bit over the horizon, and we try to be proactive. In our role in the teaching and learning department, we also intentionally work with the technology department to start communications early and often about things that we see on the horizon approaching. How can we head off any potential roadblocks for teachers and students in the classroom? And we want to make sure that we make technology as easy as possible. That's our goal in facilitating that communication. Caitlin.
And finally, we like to say that we set the floor for technology integration in the district, not just a ceiling. Throughout this past year, we have provided training and self-paced guides that you can see on the screen that encourage teachers to use the tools that they already have to the fullest extent. And with us being able to go into the schools, we're able to show them firsthand how they can take that technology to the next level. Our Microsoft sessions have been instrumental during the transition from Google, keeping faculty and staff members informed, which has always been their number one priority. They just want to know what's going on. And so that's what we've been able to help with. We also support them as they try something new. You've probably had something new that you've tried before that you're really nervous about. And that's what we have been able to assist our teachers with. And then finally, we love to celebrate with them as they are successful and they like to show things that they've done. I'm still on that slide, but that's okay. That's okay. We lead the digital coaches, like Penny said, as they provide on-site support at their schools. We started this year with a 90-day checklist to walk them through specific tasks and checkpoints, including the technology integration survey that you can see at the top of the screen. And we also gave them information about the Barrow County Student Technology Competition, which we had great success with, both at the county level, at the regional level as well. And we're looking forward to seeing students compete at the state level very soon. We also have been tapping into their individual skill sets. Not only are they teachers, but they are creators. And so we've been using our Tech Tip Tuesday page as a way for our digital coaches to highlight tools that they've been using in their classrooms and sharing that information with the district. Through our work with the technology and communication teams, we've created resources for the Microsoft Monday newsletter, and we have recently started our very own newsletter that highlights TIG. It's called Investigate. And we are using that as a way to inform our BCSS members of EdTech initiatives and training opportunities. And again, we like to celebrate. Or in December, we had, through the Microsoft Monday newsletter, we had a trivia contest, and we were able to award 5 teachers who had made 100% on the trivia quiz with a little prize. And it was little, it was a cup with candy in it, but the brightness in their eyes and the excitement that they had, it goes a long way. And we're excited to continue that throughout our time as TIGs. We do have 3 highlights from the year. They include the monster meet. You can see in the top right-hand corner of that slide, some monsters. And that really just promotes collaboration, communication throughout our district, with having teacher pairs pair up and use their classes and meet via video conference and just tap into some creativity. We also have a district-wide partnership with Canva, which is a design website that teachers are familiar with, but what we are very excited about is using that with student creation and getting that tool in our students' hands and showing them how to use that website. And then finally, we led the district conversation as we move toward adopting a learning management system. Throughout these endeavors, we have built what we feel is a strong foundation for technology use in our district and the classrooms district-wide. And we're excited to see what our teachers and students can continue to do through strong, effective technology use. And then finally, as you can see, we bring many skills to the table. Amy and Penny from their previous employment locations, they are bringing a lot of information. And then just as being homegrown Barrow County over here, we're very excited about what we're able to provide for our district. We hope to use these skills to strengthen instructional technology use in the district and seeing our students and teachers as they succeed. So thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, ladies.
Well done, and they've made a huge difference this year. It's ever changing. I don't know how y'all keep up with it with the technology.
We appreciate you,
I
ladies.
can't anymore.
I think the schools like them. That's what it sounds. Anything else, Dr. Moten? All right, Ms. Beggs? All righty, Dr. Thompson?
Well, good evening, everyone. The purpose of this particular departmental report that we've added for this year, as I mentioned in a previous meeting, was to keep you guys updated on the implementation of our 5-year strategic plan. We want to highlight areas that we have been able to begin implementation, we've been able to complete, and we're starting to see returns on the investment. But we also want to periodically update everyone on the actual state of the plan itself. So as a reminder, this is our 5-year strategic plan. We have 4 strategic areas that we are focusing on. Those include academics and student success, elevating the teaching profession, communications and culture, and finances and infrastructure. So Rochelle, if you'll scroll to the second page, please, or just go to the second page. Thank you. So each of these areas has sub-goal areas that we've tried to narrow down a little more about the things that have to be accomplished in order to be able to achieve the overall vision of that particular area. And there are also, during the strategic planning process, there were specific action steps that were identified that the district needed to put in place to be able to achieve that particular vision of the plan. So for each of those areas, we are trying to track and make sure that we are on track and getting all of those things implemented by 2026. So that we're not losing momentum. And obviously things can interfere, such as COVID last year. So it's always important for us to take stock of where we are at so that we're keeping ourselves on track and holding ourselves internally accountable. So what we've tried to do is we've worked with each of the departments that implement these areas. And if you look at the bottom of that, Rochelle, I'd pick a random page. There's a key, and each action step can be in one of 5 states at a given time. And this is a snapshot. We anticipate doing this report twice a year. Once in January is kind of a mid-year report, and then once in July to kind of tie it together at the end of a particular school year, so we can update where we are at. So where a particular action step can be at a snapshot, we could be researching. Some of these items are pretty heavy lifts. They involve changing a lot of our current practices or implementing very large scale programs. So you don't do those things on a whim. You take the time to learn what's been successful in other districts, learn what it would take to actually successfully implement. And so at times it may be in the researching stage, which means we're researching that particular item. Implementing would mean certain components of that plan have already been put in place or have been implemented, but there are other aspects of it that are waiting to be phased in or rolled in. So partially implemented, not quite complete. In the year we start implementation, if we finish it that year, it is completed, meaning we have implemented it that particular year, but it is generally in place. And now we're evaluating results, making small tweaks as one does when a program gets implemented. And then finally, we have ongoing, which is ideally when you implement a program and it's successful, you want to keep maintaining it going forward. And if you go through the plan, there are areas of this, and one I pointed out to highlight that are things that we do every year. So for example, under finances and infrastructure, you don't have to go to this, Rochelle, but there's an item that is demonstrates fiscal responsibility through thoughtful and consistent oversight of budget development. And Jennifer and her team do that extremely well, as we have seen tonight. And so that's always going to be a thing they shoot to do. That's never going to change. But because it is important, it's part of the plan, and that would be classified as ongoing. That means that's something that we have in place. We just have to maintain it and make sure it doesn't slip. So the idea is each of these is tagged with where we are in the implementation of that particular item. And as we move forward, the goal is for all of those to be moved into the completed and ongoing category by 2026. Now, I want to caution one thing. Some of these are heavier lifts than others. We've highlighted 2 programs earlier this year in this department level. One of them was implementing our internal dashboards and our public dashboards. The other was implementing Character Strong. Those were a lot of work that went into those, but they basically involved buying a program, which the board was gracious enough to do for us in both those areas, and implementing it. Not every step is that easy. Some of them require a tremendous amount of research organization to put in place. So I encourage you to think about it. This is a marathon, not a sprint. Some of these things probably won't be completed until year 4 or 5. Some of these are going to be a little easier and we can knock off at the very beginning. The idea is just the closer we get to the end of the plan, the more we should start seeing actions being completed. And ultimately, we're going to start seeing the fruits of that investment, because we're going to start seeing some of the visions in these areas actually start to come into being, more so than already. The very last page, if you'll go to that, Rochelle. This is where we kind of, for each of the areas under the plan, we kind of give a percentage of those that are currently either completed or ongoing. And what I'd like to encourage you to do is to not do the normal human thing, which is to interpret them vertically and say, well, why is this particular area lower than this particular area? Because not all of those areas are created equal. And some of those are going to require a little more investment. Some of those are going to require a lot more time and energy to get done. The most important thing is the closer we get in the full implementation of the plan, the more we should start seeing things being completed and implemented. And ideally by 2026, you'll see every one of these things completely in the dark green. And so this is intended for you to be able to compare these over time. So in July, we'll come back with another update and you'll see more of these having been implemented and completed. And you'll see that those bars start to move to the right side. So it's a long game. Strategic plan and real change always takes time. So I'd encourage you to keep that in mind. So this is to help the board understand where we're at. If you obviously have any questions on any of these areas, we're always happy to come talk about those with you in this particular department. That's report. That's what it's here for. So I'll field any questions you guys have. Yes, ma'am.
Under communication and culture. Can you just tell me a little bit about how we can get to the green part of that?
Was there a particular item you're referring to?
Just talking about culture and diversity and making sure that we're doing everything we can to increase community and business involvement, and also to get parents involved.
Well, one of the, in our charter, one of the 3 areas that we identified as being our highest needs is actually managing growth, but that's not just absolute growth in terms of students. That is exactly what you're referring to. We serve a more diverse community. We serve a more diverse clientele. There's a lot of work being done on that. There's some things we're still trying to research out. That's not something I can extemporaneously speak on sitting up here tonight, but that is an area that we can look at trying to get some updates for you guys in the future, because you're 100% correct. That's a critical area. It's also one that has to be done right, because the worst thing we can do is just do something that's sort of low level, that really doesn't move the real needle, and just say, well, we fixed that. We completed it. We moved it to green. To make that really work, that requires a lot of investment, and we're doing those things, but it's a hard one. So that's an area we can certainly highlight for you in the future.
And I think that's actually a really good example too of some things are very department specific, and say the dashboards that fell really under Matt and working with in that area. And so those things we're able to do. That particular piece especially takes everyone. If everyone in the schools, everyone at central office, the board, everyone affiliated And so that is a much slower pace to getting where we want to be with that. And honestly, that may be one that in 6 years, we're still trying to work on. We've seen it come a long way over the past decade for sure. And to be honest with ourselves and everyone else, COVID pushed us back a little bit on that because, you know, we've taken that into account too when we're assessing this, but we want to do, you know, fair and honest self-assessment with this. And that's what this is about. So it's, yeah, I mean, I would love to bring them to you now. They're all green and we're good to go, but that's not realistic. That's not going to happen.
I was just thinking maybe we can get some of the TIC folks to work on that.
Well,
They're pretty awesome. They can do awesome things.
they're going to be asking you for some money in just a little bit that will help us get to that area.
It's a very good question. That's
quickly.
partially why
So
we
I'm glad
put
you-
this in
glad you
place, is
said
to
that.
hold ourselves internally accountable because it's a big plan. There's a lot of moving pieces. And as Dr. McMichael said, there's certain aspects of it. And there's sometimes the more critical aspects where it's shared ownership. And there's an old saying, if a bunch of people own it, nobody owns it. Like, so it is helpful for us to have a plan where we can put on paper and say, okay, we got to make sure we don't lose sight of that. And now that particular one you raised
But
is
that
such a
one-
critical thing to what we
That
do
one
every
on our
day.
action plans will be broken down.
Yeah.
You know, in every school and every department and, you know, those type of things. And then there'll be captains that would shepherd it in school at each, but then that has to all come together too. Whereas go back to the dashboards, that was 5 or 6 people working together to get that
Yes.
done under Matt's leadership, but it was a finite task. I'm not sure this
Well, this
is a finite task. And we also need our parents and community to be a part of it.
Absolutely.
But the way I read it is yellow isn't bad.
No,
Right?
of
Once
course
we
not.
get to green, we're gonna make it yellow again because we're always going to be
Absolutely.
improving.
One of the things you have to
In
keep in mind,
2027,
it's a
we may do that.
snapshot of where we're at in year 2 of a 5-year plan. And it's going to be an evolving document as we go forward, where I would suggest as a board, and believe it, we would be concerned about this before, is if we're in year 4 and we're still seeing lots and lots of yellow across multiple of these things, that's when things get a little dicier. But right now, we're still at the ripe stage of just implementing a lot of this, researching a lot of this, and it's a marathon.
Dr. Thompson, I guess for me, I would be more concerned if we got to the end of our time frame and we had everything that was ongoing. If we challenge ourselves.
Yes, absolutely.
Excuse me, and just my take on it, maybe you can bring by myself, but if we're still implementing stuff, maybe we challenge ourselves.
Yeah.
a little bit. And I want to make sure that we do that, because that's part of who we are.
We're trying to make real change, not just me produce a document that has a lot of green on it, because if you want to do that, I got time, I can do it. If we had a 5-year plan where everything was fully implemented in year 2, we didn't write a very good plan, because the idea of a plan, and I think we did write a good plan. The idea is you do challenge yourself, and some of these will take a lot of time to get right. There may be some of these that we actually implement and mark as completed, but then we realize they're not working the way we wanted them to, and we have to revisit them and go back to the implementation stage on some of these. That's also a
Yeah,
possibility.
but also
Real change is not always
there's also
linear.
the monitoring piece once it,
Yes.
gets into the completed
I mean,
part.
they may work for a time period and then
Correct.
as times change, they're not as valuable.
5 years from now, during that process of the next 5-year plan, we may look at some of these and say, either we're doing this so well, it's just ingrained and we don't need to address it, just keep monitoring, or that didn't work for us and things have changed. We have, XYZ, more students, more schools by then, it's back in the old days when we used to, and those of you sitting over to my right, definitely remember this, we'd have, the plans that were this thick and we'd look at them beginning of the year, and we'd stick them on the shelf. They weren't living documents, and this is we mean for this to be a living document and to keep everything moving and to hold ourselves accountable, because honestly, we can do that better than anybody else. We just have to be forthright on it and honest with it. And that's what it's about.
When we had the 5-year plan thing that they did want it.
This is
How long is How many
the,
years ago was that?
that was one,
Only 2, it seems like about 4.
it does, but it was right at the tail end of COVID. And
Was it? I thought it was right before.
yeah, so this came out of that for
Okay.
that was that year. This started the next year, and then we're in year two.
That's why
Time
it feels so
flies.
long, because
Yep.
COVID added
That's
to your
right.
life.
It seems like it's been 5 years.
And we all aged a lot this weekend. I can't believe we're already at that point in the year too. So it's this year especially is fun.
All righty, we appreciate you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
All right, we're gonna jump into old business and bring up Dr. Green.
Yes, so the policy there has been on the table since the last regularly scheduled meeting. I have heard no comments coming in from the public, and so I would ask that the board take this off of the table and approve said policy.
Any questions? Thank you, sir. All righty, Dr. Jones.
We're gonna put that on consent agenda.
Are you guys good with putting that on consent agenda?
If it's possible, yes.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Good evening. Hope everyone's doing well tonight. Last work session, I presented to you some revisions for policy IHC class rankings. It has been posted for public review and I have not received any questions or comments. And so the superintendent recommends removing policy from public review and approving said policy.
Okay, any questions? Consent agenda?
Just real quick, this, as a reminder, is to not give extra credit for dual enrollment classes beyond the classes, beyond the full load. Is that correct?
That's correct. If
So that
students,
eliminates 4 classes in a semester or over the summer, getting the extra credit.
it's correct. They'll be weighted for classes taken within their normal schedule, but anything outside will not be.
All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, moving into new business. John St. Clair.
Thank you. As part of our continuous process of keeping the district infrastructure updated to meet increasing demand and to keep leveraging technology in the green. Let's see, I totally lost my train of thought. Upgrades and additional capacity and management licenses are sought for numerous schools and the board office to be predominantly funded by federal E-rate funds. Just a quick reminder of how the E-rate program works. It's a program that we request funding from the FCC run E-rate program. They review our requests. They give us an award based on our free and reduced lunch count. We get a discount on the technology we purchase. The process takes anywhere from 3 months to an entire year from initial filing to announcement of award, depending on when you get in their line and how much review they have in front of them. So an RFP was posted, 2 vendors responded. Because it is an E-rate funded application, we have to do a weighted matrix to review it. The competitive weighted matrix, the low bid respondent and the highest weighted scorer, MXN, has done similar business with the district previously. They met the terms of the RFP and they are a valid E-rate service provider, and they are not adversely listed in the SAM.gov database. 814,000 of MXN's response is E-rate funding eligible. The district will either pay 20 or 30% of this portion, with the E-rate program paying the rest, assuming we're awarded. 39,000 of that is not E-rate funding eligible. The district will pay 100% out of pocket of these costs. And the district's ultimate funding award will either be 70% or 80% based on our free and reduced lunch count. Our funding allotment prior to COVID was 80% funded, 20% out of pocket. Post-pandemic, our numbers have dropped a little, so our funding rate appears likely to be set at 70%, but we won't know until they actually give us our award letter what rate we were funded at. So the district's total out of pocket will either be, if we're 70% funded, it'll be the ineligible amount that we pay full and a discounted amount totaling of $283,985. Or if we're 80% funded, then our out-of-pocket amount will drop to $202,000. We are anticipating getting 70% funding though. So we've set our recommendation based on the worst case scenario of 70% funding. The next step will be review by the E-rate program. And it's possible in review, they may determine that part of our request is not eligible as well and deny that portion of it while still allowing the rest of our request. So we're therefore requesting an allowance to cover this possibility. If we have a couple of line items that are dropped, that we are raising our total board approval request to $300,000 out of pocket. It gives us a little bit of wiggle room in case we lose a couple of line items. The financial impact will be $854,438 total, a maximum out-of-pocket cost of $300,000 from various ITS and ITS Plus budgets, and the remainder to be funded by the federal E-rate program. The superintendent recommends authorizing the purchase of network switches, wireless access points, and management licenses from low bid respondent NXN of Woodstock, Georgia, in the pre-E-rate amount of $854,438, with a final district out-of-pocket maximum of $300,000 and the remainder funded by the federal E-rate program.
Have they ever come back to us and said they weren't allowing something that you requested?
Yes, it doesn't happen very often. The list of requirements and guidelines for the E-rate program, this is the government, they're here to help, looks kind of like the tax code. And so that we try very hard to make sure that we parse it out ahead of time. Occasionally they have a slightly different opinion. So it's never been major though.
Okay.
We've never had to come back to you except once and ask you to relook at it because our estimates of what they would authorize have been off.
Consent agenda? All righty, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Dr. Moten.
I am presenting information on the learning management system. In order to serve the diverse needs of learners across Barrow County school system, amplify classroom instruction, and prepare our students for future learning and work operations and environments, access to a full learning management system was proposed. An RFP was posted and proposals were received by 3 vendors. You can see on the screen there are 3 vendors listed. The first one is Instructure. The second one is Power School, and the third one is D2L. The lowest bid from D2L of Towson, Maryland includes a deep 1-year discount, but was the 3rd choice of the district and the teacher advisory committees based on product features. Power School's Schoology LMS scored similarly to our recommendation with the exception of teacher support. Instructure's Canvas LMS was the top choice of both the district and the teacher advisory committees. The quoted price includes tier 1 support for teachers. Canvas has met the terms of the RFP, has done similar business with the nearby school districts and similar school districts, and they have provided pricing through the school year 2027 through 2028. And is not adversely listed in the SAM.gov database. The financial impact is $3.32 per student with tier 1 support, staff support, for a purchase total of $52,000 for the school year 23-24 from various school funds and departmental budgets. The superintendent, based on this information, recommends authorizing the purchase of Canvas Learning Management System as our LMS for Instructure of Salt Lake City, Utah, for 10,000 users, grades 6 through 12, in the amount of $3.32 per user, with tier 1 staff support for a purchase total of $52,500 for school year 23-24. A multi-year contract is requested so that we do not have to return annually to the Board of Education for this request.
All right, any questions? Consent agenda? Thank you, ma'am.
Secondly, I have Heinemann Publishing Literacy Materials. The materials will be used to help teachers deliver effective literacy mini lessons and differentiate literacy instruction for students. The materials support district and individual school improvement plan goals as well as L4GA grant goals are Auburn Elementary School, Bear Creek Middle School, and Russell Middle School. Auburn Elementary, up to $50,000 for leveled literacy intervention kits and guided reading libraries for classrooms. Bramlett Elementary, up to $6,000 for leveled literacy intervention kits. Bear Creek Middle, up to $20,000 for text sets for independent reading and small group reading instruction. Russell Middle, up to $20,000 for text sets for independent reading and small group reading instruction. And for the district, up to $254,000 for the newly revised K-2 units of study reading mini lessons for grades K through 2 teachers, for growth and replacement units for decodable text and for professional books. The financial impact for this is up to $350,000 and will come from a combination of our L4GA grant, CARES Act funding, and Title I consolidated funds. Based on this information, the superintendent recommends authorizing the purchase of up to $350,000 for literacy materials from Heinemann Publishing, a sole source provider of educational materials. A combination of L4GA, CARES Act, and Title I consolidated funds will be used for the school and district-wide purchases that I have outlined.
Thank you, ma'am. Any questions?
Dr. Michael, can CARES Act pay for some of this stuff because it's like a catch-up kind of situation because of COVID?
That's part of it.
That's interesting.
Yeah, CARES Act is actually really opening up, so it's paying for a lot of stuff except for labor.
Right.
But it's really opening up just to pay for whatever our needs are at this time. This will be our last year that we have CARES fund. So everything that, like Dr. Moten's talking about, is sustainable. So as soon as we were gonna pay the first year out of ESSER funds, but then after that, it's gotta come in the general fund. So next year should be a pretty good budget year, but the year after that.
Got it. Well, thank you. Just curious.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Mr. Furno.
Okay, we're asking the superintendent to recommend a guaranteed maximum price in the amount of $1.5 million from Charles Black Construction to improve our tennis courts at Appalachia High School and Winder Barrow High School. If you recall, in November of 21, the board approved Charles Black Construction to be our construction manager for non-state funded projects, including improvements to athletic facilities, and projects over $25,000 come to you all for approval. And so, of course, this fits in that category. Our tennis courts at the high schools have not been resurfaced in over 8 years, and they're showing excessive wear and cracking. So resurfacing is necessary along with associated improvements to the complexes. And lighting is also needed to accommodate school use of the courts in the winter. I think it is. I mean, it's dependent on a lot of things, you know, the soil under the courts and the asphalt mix that you got from the plant, you know, that batch and that sort of thing. But yes, I believe that's pretty good life before resurfacing.
Did you guys get like quotes on that, or is that, seems a little high to me, just I don't know what it costs to resurface, but that seems like a lot of money to resurface tennis courts.
Yes, we do. We get multiple prices from contractors. And this is basically taking up the asphalt that's there and putting down new. So we're not just going on top of it. We're churning up what's there and using that as a base. This is taking everything that's out and building back new. So I mean, it's a full depth asphalt rebuild, and then the painting and striping on top of that. And lighting.
I know I sound like a broken record, but we've spent so much money recently, you know, replacing lights at Winder Barrow and Appalachia, and now this at Winder Barrow and Appalachia. And I mean, I feel like, you know, we're still, the kids at Bassett have nothing.
Yeah.
And we're spending money redoing things that, you know, are maybe they need to be redone, but they're fine. They have something. And, you know, we're a major burden on the the county. I mean, you know, the rec department is spread so thin. I mean, those fields are full. I mean, gosh, they need
Yeah.
more fields. There's just only so much space with the way this county is growing. I mean, Lynn is so right. She's been telling them they need a park across 316 for how long? How long have you been preaching that since we were on the SPLOST committee? And they haven't done it yet. I mean, there's only so much. They're literally having practices and things until 9 and 10 o'clock just to be able to share. And so, I mean, I get it, but it just seems to me like, you know,
I understand, and
just my 2 cents.
I won't put Derek on the spot, but I think Appalachia and Winder Barrow also send tennis teams over, or Vince, you may know that, to the rec department because they're not able to utilize the facility when it gets dark early. So this would help in that respect as well. I know where you're coming from. And we've got to take care of what we have too before we expand out, and those courts are cracking. Our tracks are probably going to need some attention in the next year or two as well. They're aging, they're getting older, and it's stuff we have to look after. So I know where you're coming from there.
So how long, once we resurface these or completely redo these courts, how long do you anticipate it would be before we'd have to do that again? Obviously, the lights will last forever, but.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of a guessing game. I mean, you can see cracks pretty soon after it's done, maybe a couple years even, you know.
So they have a lifespan somewhere between 8 and 10 years, maybe.
Maybe. I'm not comfortable putting a number of years on it. I'm sorry. It's just the earth moves, you know, and you know, asphalt that you get from a plant it's a variable. Now we can try to fill those voids and cracks and things like that and give them a little bit longer life as they go along. But it's tough to tell. They do as part of that, the coloring that goes on it, that's a sealing type product.
Years is actually a pretty good stretch for a tennis court.
I think it
My
is.
experience.
When was the last time they were done?
It's 8 years. Yeah. And I think that's pretty good, but we probably,
Will they warranty this so that if anything comes up, they'll come and repair it the next few years?
we'll get a standard warranty like a year, you know,
The
but
majority of the cost of the paving or the lighting?
the paving. Yeah, that's, and you know, it's where Winder's situated there. It's a little bit tough to get in there, you know, with equipment, things like that. All those kinds of things go into the cost.
Oh, yeah, that is a little cumbersome spot.
Right, yeah,
That's true.
yeah. Now the lights would have a greater warranty, but you know, the asphalt's gonna be more your standard.
Number of kids that use that and how often those facilities are used, and from what I see, they're used constantly,
All the time.
so.
They get a lot of use, and I think they would get more if we have the lighting there and they
Having the
can
lighting on there.
spend a little more time on their
Pick that up,
campus.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so consent agenda?
Yes.
All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Dr. Green?
First, an observation, it is hard to go last.
Especially when you're.
Especially when you're impatient like I am. I've just been sitting over here. I got my steps in with my bouncing leg.
Should have asked the superintendent to go forward.
Well, you know, I thought about that when I sat right there, and it's a little bit late for that. So I am pleased and I am honored to come to you tonight to talk you through the process that we went through to arrive at a recommendation to give to you related to rezoning the schools on the Appalachia cluster side of our county. On November the 1st, you accepted the superintendent's recommendation that we do a rezone in order to accommodate the new elementary school, which will open this in August. And so we have been about the work in doing that. And I want to walk you through that process this evening. before I forget, I'm gonna get to a slide in a minute with all the names of the committee members, but I don't want to forget to recognize them. We have many people who have worked with us on the information that will be in the recommendation presentation tonight. So if you served on the Appalachia Cluster Rezoning Committee, would you mind standing so folks can see who you are? And they'll know who to blame or to celebrate who we're done. Thank you. And I hope after you see the presentation, you will appreciate the hard work that these folks put in to arrive at this. The rezoning is never easy because it affects a lot of people in a lot of ways. And it's especially difficult when you're rezoning 6 schools. And so, but this group worked well together. There's many members of our committee who aren't here tonight, but I asked those who could to join us so that you would be able to put faces and names together and see the ones that that worked with us on this project. So I appreciate y'all. I want to walk you through, I'm not going to read every one of these bullets, but basically that will kind of walk you through where my presentation will be going. And this is the process that this committee used. We followed the same pattern that we have used in previous rezoning efforts. And I'm going to try not to go too slow, but I know for some of you, you've not been through a rezoning process before as a board member. So I want to go slow enough to help you to kind of really understand what all went into this, but not so slow that those of you who are actually on the committee and joined us for that will get too bored and anxious and get your steps in with your legs bouncing as well. So this is the rezoning committee members. We had a team of 30. We had representation from parents, from staff members, principals, teachers of the year, and community members, board members, and some community members. We had 2 parents that were nominated from each of the 6 schools that were involved. And some of these parents may have had students at elementary and middle school, but each of the 6 schools that we were considering in the rezone effort had 2 parent representatives. We had the principals of each of those schools, teachers of the year from each of those schools. We had community members, board members, and some of our staff on it as well. All told, we had a large committee of 30 people. Dr. McMichael was also an ex officio member, and I was the facilitator for the group. So these are the people that were involved in the process. So the role of the committee was really fourfold. One was to establish the criteria that we would use in trying to redraw the zone. The next thing that we did, Cindy took that information and she went back and she drew up 3 options at the elementary school level. And then we had 3 options to consider later in the middle school zones. The committee considered those. Then we put out some recommendations to the public and asked for parents to give us their thoughts and input on that. And then we met last week to arrive at a final recommendation that we will present to you here in this meeting. So we had some guidelines for our work together, and I will tell you that this committee did an excellent job of working together. They really kept the focus on, you know, what's best for the district and all of those that were being impacted. They really did a good job of working together respectfully, listening to one another, giving honest feedback. And this presentation is really the result of coming together with consensus and, you know, and agreeing on what we believe is the best recommendation for our school district. So we had 4 meetings. After the November 1st board meeting, we got to work and put together the committee and listed input from them on good meeting dates and times. And we had our first meeting on November the 17th, in which we set the criteria that we wanted to be used as the guiding force for drawing the attendance zones. We met on December the 5th to look at 3 options related to the the elementary school zones. We discussed those, and we pretty quickly reached consensus of what we thought was the best layout for attendance zones for the elementary schools. Then on December 13th, we came back together and we did the same process for middle schools. As you will see shortly, we had a little bit more discussion on really which option might work the best for us at the middle school level. But then last Tuesday, we came together, we reviewed public input, all of our previous decisions, and actually arrived at a solution that we really felt strong about. And we really felt like really accomplished what we were trying to accomplish. So this was the results of the first meeting, and some of these pictures were actually pictures from our meetings. And we got together and we were establishing what were the primary things that we wanted to consider in trying to draw the maps. And so these in not a particular order, but were the main things that we wanted to keep in mind. Length of time on buses, proximity to school, and not so much the difference between a 10-minute ride and a 20-minute ride, but making sure that we didn't draw zones that had kids on the bus for an excessive length of time, and trying to keep those as short as we could. Not splitting subdivisions, making sure that the routes to school were as safe as possible, both for our bus transportation, but also for parents who would be driving those roads, getting their kids to and from school. We looked at enrollment numbers, and a goal was to try to keep our schools as close as possible to the same size and balance that enrollment across schools. We looked at projections for growth and where that growth may be coming, and trying to balance future growth as well. And then to keep our schools as even as possible with Title I and no pocket zoning for that. So Cindy then took this information, went back to our planning software, brought back to us 3 different elementary school maps to consider. We got in groups and discussed what we liked about each one, what we didn't like about each one, and sort of ranked the 3 in a priority order. And pretty much all of our groups almost immediately arrived at option 3. Here was the map that met the criteria the best. One of those groups had it ranked tied with another map, but we were really quickly to come to consensus on this particular map. Just to tell you a little bit more about this map, I know those are small, maybe better for those of you looking at monitors, but you can see that top row is if we had these zones in place this year, what would the numbers be? And then with a growth factor, an anticipated enrollment using those zones for next year, and then percentage of representation of economic status there. In the middle is just the middle school numbers, which we'll get to more details about that later. And then at the bottom is where we are projecting out for 3 years what the enrollment might be based on current growth in the county across these schools in the attendance zones that are being proposed for you. Some of the reasons that we preferred this one to the others was that it was the most balanced distribution of students among all the schools. The projected growth was best distributed among the schools. It maintained major roads as the dividing lines between schools, and we felt in general that the traffic patterns to each of these schools was better. So after that meeting, we moved on to middle school, and we did the same process for middle school. Cindy took those same criteria and the zones that we had recommended for elementary schools. She went back to the table. She came back with 3 options. 2 of those options were maintaining the feeder system that we currently employ in the school system. And so when you got 5 schools and you maintain a feeder system, then one middle school will get 3 of the elementary schools, the other middle school will get 2. So we looked at both of those options. And then because the committee, when they set the criteria, decided that they didn't want the feeder system to be a constraining factor, and they wanted to see what options we may have if we didn't maintain the feeder system, we brought option 3, which was maintain the existing middle school boundaries without maintaining the feeder system. this was a harder decision. This was something that took us a bit more, and we decided rather than leaving that meeting with a final recommendation, that we would put this out to the public and ask our parents to give us thoughts on what they thought about this particular model. So here's some numbers that compare the three models that we considered. The first option is if Bethlehem Elementary, the new elementary school in Yargo, fed into Heyman Morris, and you'll see those numbers for each of the two middle schools there. In that model, Auburn and Kennedy would be at West Side. You'll see the next option was Auburn Kennedy and the new school feed into West Side, which would mean Bethlehem and Yargo would be at Heyman Morris, and you see those numbers. And then the third option, and the one we put out for public review, was the current zones without changing them at the middle school level, and what those enrollment numbers would be projected out through the year 2026. So for the next 3 years. Here were some reasons that the group felt that that was the leading candidate at that time, is there were no changes to the middle school attendance zones. And because we're already running buses in those zones, there would be fewer changes to the actual transportation routes. There was a more even distribution of students among the two middle schools. Because those two middle schools would be basically the same size, there'd be a little more flexibility for future growth. And because we were not rezoning at the middle school level, then if we have to come back later, when we get to the point where we're opening another middle school, then it might be easier because we would not have recently rezoned the middle schools. The one caveat to that is that it would not maintain the feeder school format, which we have been doing for 20 years. And so that was certainly something that we had to be mindful of. We put that out there, including this particular note on our website with both elementary and middle school recommendations, and the slides that I've shown you with each, the numbers and the features for public input. When we asked for public input, we did not do a generic survey where we asked everybody who got it to respond to questions. What we did is we asked people to read over the proposals that we have and to let us know if there were particular concerns that they had. So it was not everybody tell us what you think. It was, if you have concerns, let us know what those are, and then let us know a solution that you think would address those concerns. So just be aware, we were not asking everybody to respond. We had about 117 different comments that came in. We had about a 2-week window right after we came back from the break. And I have categorized these according to topic. So the ones above the white break there were comments that did relate specifically to our rezoning proposals. The ones below the line were more generic or had comments that really weren't focused in on the particular rezoning effort. For instance, one comment was, I wish we had enough buses so that high school and middle school would not ride the same buses. So that was a valid comment. We got that. I categorized that as miscellaneous because it wasn't specific to the Appalachia rezoning efforts. But I will tell you the feedback that we did get overwhelmingly, the biggest category was that they don't want us to rezone at all, especially if it involves my child. That is not surprising at all. If we had children in these grade levels and they were in the schools and they were being rezoned, that might be the response that any of us would have. So it was not at all surprising that folks would prefer that any rezoning that we do not affect them. We did have the second most frequent concerns were related to I'm being rezoned and I'm going to be a little further away from the school I'm being zoned into than I am the school I'm leaving. And I'll give you a couple of examples with that. We need to provide relief to Auburn because Auburn is really growing and in the upcoming years is going to continue to do so at an accelerated pace. So that meant we needed to move students away from Auburn. Well, in order to do that, the school is situated in that zone in such a way that you're you're drawing a line not too far east of where Auburn actually is. So somebody who might live a mile or a mile and a half from Auburn could potentially have been rezoned to Kennedy and be 2 miles, 2.25 miles from Kennedy. But our schools are not, our county's not growing in a way, and our schools are not situated in a way that every school can be in the exact middle of that attendance zone. So I understand that. But those are just some of the natures of, kind of what we're doing. We also got some concerns related to that, specifically to the Bethlehem zone being cut off at 11, which where Bethlehem sits, it's right close to 11. So if 11, a major highway, remember our criteria, cut off at major highway, those just across 11 would have been really close to Bethlehem. And until we open the new school, there is no elementary school east of Bethlehem in the Appalachia cluster zone. So there's going to be some folks that are going to be zoned to the new school that would be further away from Bethlehem. And I'm going to show you some specifics related to that in a minute. Even though we specifically said, we want you to fill out the forms if you have concerns, we did have 7 people that filled out the form and said positive things, that they could tell a lot of good work had gone into it. They appreciated what we were doing. They liked it. They thought it made sense. So that's always a good thing to get. And so we were glad to get those. The next most frequent thing, and it was only 6 out of 117, but there were 6 people who specifically mentioned that they did not like the fact that this particular option was not maintaining the feeder school system. Specifically, there would be comments such as, I don't want my kid to go to school with and make friends with students who then, when they go to middle school, are being zoned to go to different places. And you may remember when I made this presentation related to whether we do a 4th and 5th grade academy or whether we rezone, we had parents that complained that a 4th and 5th grade academy would do something similar as well. So we did have folks that really didn't like the fact that that the proposal they were commenting on did not maintain the feeder system. And then we had a concern just about crossing 316, which I understand, but it was pretty much impossible to draw these zones without somebody crossing 316. And know that currently 81 has an overpass and 53 has an overpass. Y'all correct me if I'm remembering this wrong. And they're actively working on getting 11. So pretty quickly, most of the ways that you will cross 316 are going to be on an overpass, underpass type situation. We also had some comments that weren't particularly related to this, just to give you an idea of kind of what those were. They were specific questions, some related to questions such as, will Bramlett be rezoned? Or will my child still go to Appalachia? And some other types of questions that were specific to the family. So they weren't necessarily giving us guidance on how we need to draw the zones, but they were just reactions to that. We had some folks that filled out the form and didn't leave any comments. And then, some other miscellaneous types of things that were there. So we went over this with the committee, and the one specific set of solutions that people mentioned, and I want to share that with you here, and the committee considered these, is that we had 6 people that mentioned that by drawing the line at Highway 11, there would be people who would live just east of 11, who may even be close enough to see the school across Highway 11, but would be zoned to the new elementary school. And so we considered that, and we felt like that 11 is still a major dividing line. If you try to find a dividing line east of 11, it's really hard to find a place to draw the line that would make it easy for traffic to be able to get across there and then back across 11 to deliver students to the school. And nobody's really walking across 11 to walk to school. And that's even a difficult road to just drive across. So we felt like that, even though we understood the the circumstances, we felt like that it was still best to leave the dividing line there at a major highway. But I wanted you to see that we did take those comments into account, and we had table discussions about whether we wanted to do anything different based on those comments. And also, I was honest with the group. I'll be honest with you. When we went into this process, I never dreamed that we would have a thought that we would go away from the feeder system. 20 years of doing the feeder system, it didn't really occur to me that we might not. So when it looked like we might be making a recommendation to you that went against the feeder system, I wanted the committee to make sure they made that decision, that recommendation, with their eyes wide open. So I wanted them to consider in writing what it might mean to go against the feeder system. So we went over this slide of just some things that would change if we decided to do something different. This feeder system has been in place for at least 20 years, at least since 2003, and that a recommendation to go against that would be really changing something that's been in place for 20 years. All the other previous rezoning actions that we looked at, which I think was 3, had maintaining a feeder system as a high priority. Our current middle schools are designed to accommodate 1,200. There was some concern that the numbers would get above 1,000 if we maintained a feeder system. Vertical planning is a little simplified with the feeder system. It's not dramatic, but when you're relating to just the one school versus 2, it's a little bit simpler. Class size is not determined by the size of the school. Class size, we try to maintain consistent across grade levels across schools, regardless of the full size of the school. Transportation options in some ways are better with the feeder system. Routing is easier because basically the middle high school routes replicate what they're doing at the elementary school level. And it is possible, if a person doesn't move out of their house and we don't have to rezone again, that they could even maintain a driver for their entire educational career. And that beginning of school and end of day contact being consistent was a positive thing. Our transportation administration is organized around a feeder system, and generally families prefer it. Not everyone, and for some it's not a real consideration, but there are families who have told us that they generally prefer that. We showed them that not to dissuade them from the recommendation of what they felt like was best, but just to make sure that as you're making this decision, there's always give and take in any decision that we make. And we want to make sure that we're making recommendations that take into account all the factors. So we asked them in their table groups to consider all this information and to either reaffirm the previous decision or to offer suggestions. After meeting in their table groups, they came back and they reaffirmed that they still felt like keeping the middle school attendance zones the way they were was the best of the 3 options that they had seen at that point. And then we threw a curveball. And we offered to them what we called a hybrid option. And I'm fixing to show you that. In which we tried to find a middle ground that would maintain the feeder system as much as possible, but also maintain balance between the 2 middle schools as much as possible. So we showed them this map. And I'll show you 2 more slides related to this. But basically, if you're looking at this map, if you'll look at that green blotch in the middle of the gray there, and just think about the county, and the little spot in yellow that sticks up above that, that is a spot that's south of Fort Yargo. It's east of 81 and west of 11 and north of 316. Just sort of imagine that. You see that little spot right there. That would be zoned to Bethlehem. And if we didn't change anything with the middle school zones, those students would go to West Side. But by making this adjustment, then 4 of the 5 elementary schools would maintain a feeder pattern. So 4 out of 5 the students would all go to the same middle school. The one school that wouldn't be true for would be the new elementary school. And they're split across sides of 316. And so it wouldn't be a perfect feeder system, but it would get us a large part of the way there. These are the numbers. The parts in yellow would be the two feeder options that we looked at in a previous slide. The bottom row is the hybrid option. And so these numbers are much improved over the numbers if we tried to do one of the other two traditional feeder systems. Not quite the same as if we stayed with the middle schools with no changes, but much closer to that. And if you'll notice, as we go across the years, they stay relatively consistent there. And so we then kind of projected what the features of this would be. So there would be a few changes to middle school zones, but not much. It maintains the feeder system for 4 of the 5 elementary schools. It's a better balance of population among the middle schools than the other feeder options. And it was a workable compromise between having a feeder or not having a feeder. The one caveat to this one is that there would be students at the new elementary school who would still be split between 2 middle schools. So keep that in mind. So after we had that discussion, we then talked about grandfathering. And so this pretty well matches what we've done in previous years. Rising 5th graders, if they were zoned out of the school they'd been attending, would be able to stay put for their 5th grade year if they parents would provide transportation. We did propose that rising 7th and 8th graders would be allowed to stay put, but they would have to provide their own transportation. We felt like a couple of things with that. Number one, the middle schools can accommodate that. And second of all, a current 6th grader would not have to change schools even if they were rezoned if their parents can provide transportation. So that sort of helped to mitigate the fact that there'd be some middle schoolers that would be rezoned. And then siblings would be allowed to continue with their rising 5th or 7th and 8th grade siblings for the year that their siblings are stay put if they provide their own transportation. So that is a lot to comprehend. So let me summarize.
Amen.
We had 4 meetings. We went through the whole process. We ultimately recommended elementary option 3-1. I'm going to show you that map again in a minute. The groups quickly came to consensus on adopting the middle school hybrid option. I'll show you that again in a minute. And the grandfathering proposal that I just showed you. So in review, we are recommending that these would be the zones for the elementary schools. We're recommending that this would be the map of the zones for the middle schools. And again, the only real change from where we are now is this little yellow rectangle right below Fort Yargo. And then we're recommending the grandfathering proposal that is in front of you. So I've gone through a lot. I tried to go through quickly, but I know it wasn't as quick as some of you might have hoped. So I will answer any questions that you may have at this point.
Ken, I'd just like to note that during this whole committee process, you, Dr. Thompson, Ms. Beggs you just provided facts. And that these 3 decisions that were made by parents, community members, teachers, principals, the stakeholders, those who are in it. And you always mixed us up at different tables during each meeting. And multiple times I heard, well, I don't really like this, but it's what's best for the whole county, that from parents, from principal, and so on. And so that's one thing, the board members who didn't get to hear that and experience that these decisions or these proposals were made not by the school system, but by those that
thank you,
the community members.
And to
I'm
be
really
perfectly
surprised
blunt,
that they got away from the feeder system. I'm really
yeah,
surprised.
and well, to be perfectly blunt, if we had done it, we probably wouldn't have gone away from the feeder system. That wouldn't have been something that would have ever entered my mind if I was just going to sit up here and draw that. That came out of a lot of rich discussion and, you know, this whole process was just a masterclass, if you will, in how to do things with stakeholders and how to listen to, get as many voices into a really hard decision. Because zoning is one of the top 2 or 3 toughest things the school system does. And just really well done. And I want to give a quick shout out to everyone, of course, that participated. But I want to point out what Ms. Beggs did all the mapping kind of behind the scenes. She's the map whiz, and that's no easy task. But I especially also want to give Dr. Green some kudos. He made what can be I've seen him be very ugly in other districts, just to be blunt. I've seen him very, very contentious, and his organization and just the way he kept everything going and explained things and kept everyone in the loop was just superlative. Just really, again, Ken taught a master class on how to do it right.
So one thing, I have been involved, I think, just because I'm older and been here a long time, with all of the rezonings we've done probably
25 years.
forever, or at least in the last 20 years. This was undoubtedly the smoothest process. And to the staff's credit, to Dr. Green and Cindy and Matt, and everybody who worked on this. But mainly is because we talk about culture and getting people involved. It is so important when we have parents and business leaders and stakeholders involved in these decisions that we make. I was not about to go against it. I'm just gonna tell you right now, because you work through the process and you did a phenomenal job. And kudos to everybody and the parents, everybody was here working on it. I know it took a lot of time and a lot of thought, and it just was so smooth. And I hope we record all that so we take notes for next time.
And I want to also give props to Jason Ayers, being there and helping parents and going to the tables and answering those questions that they had as parents and teachers. And us as board members too, how's this gonna, yes, how's this gonna affect, because that helped parents and us make those decisions too.
Jason was outstanding.
I've been, like Ms. Stevens says, I've been involved with some of the zonings in the past, and this by far was a lot less painful. You know, and it went very smooth, and we were shocked because we have like about 4, 5, 6 tables. And as we started, even from the first meeting to the last, it was, you know, because we weren't listening to what the other table was doing, we were all working. And we all pretty much from the first meeting to the last were pretty consistent on what those same values are.
Yeah, Jason did an amazing job, and he has a great way of making things. I also want to give the principals that were involved a shout out too, because they came in, of course, they're principals of their schools, and their task is to take care of their schools, but they put that aside and did what's best for the entire cluster and the entire system, which is also part of the job. Well done. It was a lot of great conversation on their ends too. Thank you.
Well, it looks like y'all got some board training now. So when we have an election, you got some run.
Yep.
But you're gonna hear some complaining, because
You will.
believe you me, you cannot please everybody, no matter what you do. It doesn't matter. You can't please everybody. But just remember that you went through the process and you did the right thing. And when you hear people complaining, you'll know that at the end of the day, you had information that they didn't have. And we struggle with that all the time, that we have information that maybe everybody doesn't have. So good job. You did good.
Yeah, and I also want to point out, we had parents and teachers. We also had folks from the county commission. And I mean, we had, and some business. So we had a wide range, some didn't even have kids in the system, but they're that involved and that supported. So it was a sight to behold. It was really, really, really well done. I've been through them in 3 districts, and this was the best I've seen.
And at that last meeting, you had all the board members together at one table, and we were voting on what we wanted. And the number we wanted was not going up on the wall. And then by the time it got to our table,
Very true.
Ms. Stevens turned that paper over and says ditto. Well, yeah. Because that shows the board doesn't do what we want to do.
The teachers and the parents and the community folks, yeah, went first. So they just said, okay, we're not gonna argue with that. Let's go that way.
But I think if I remember correctly, Mr. Rackford, that was before we introduced the hybrid.
Right.
Yeah.
I feel like that saved us a little bit
It did.
and helped us to.
It's a perfect compromise.
So are we good to add this to the consent agenda?
I am, yeah, well done.
All righty.
Good job.
Thank you, sir.
Well done.
All right, so at this time, we're going to go into executive session to discuss or deliberate upon the appointment, employment, compensation, hiring, disciplinary action, or dismissal, or periodic evaluation or rating of a public officer or employee, or to interview applicants for the position of superintendent.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Lisa,
Please.
Yes, please.
Yes, yes, yes.
yes. Thank you, guys.